Welcome, listeners, to today's episode of Same Same But Different, DES's official podcast. So, my name is Edmen Leong. I am the Director of Specialised Educational Services at the Dyslexia Association of Singapore. And I'm very happy to have with me today Dr. Loh Chin Ee. So, she is an Associate Professor at NIE. And she is also my PhD supervisor. And together with her, I've been working on a study on reading motivation for struggling learners or learners with dyslexia. So perhaps for a start, maybe I can get Dr. Loh to introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Chin Ee, and I teach at the National Institute of Education. So I teach teachers who go out into teaching, and my work was actually mostly with secondary school students, but I've started looking at children who are younger as well as adult learners. Much of my work is about finding opportunities for students to have that enjoyment of reading. And I've worked a lot in school libraries and looking at print and digital reading. So my question always is, how can we get books to our young people?
Yeah, so perhaps I should also introduce myself a little. So I have been working with the Dyslexia Association of Singapore for 15 years. So I have been teaching learners who struggle, learners with dyslexia, literacy skills, and teaching them how to read for many years. I am also a parent and a foster parent, and I have experiences parenting enthusiastic readers as well as reluctant readers. So I think Dr. Loh and myself, we have a common interest, and that interest is really equipping our young learners, teaching them how to read. Yeah, so that's our common interest. So perhaps to get the conversation going, perhaps Dr. Loh, you can share with us a little bit more about your perspective in terms of why you think reading is such a crucial skill today.
I think reading is really important today because when you think about it, when you pick up your phone in order to interact, in order to get information, you need to have reading. Your everyday interactions require you to read in order to get information, in order to do things. Reading proficiency is particularly important because it helps you to access information and then to understand the world and to participate. So as a citizen in Singapore or any other country you might be at or any society, the idea is that you need to get information. And when you have that information, you are able to make decisions that will help you to function as a person in the place you're at. So definitely reading is something that we need for functioning in today's world.
Yes, that's really interesting. And you can really see that reading is so important in so many different aspects of your lives. Right? So perhaps my next topic that I would like to ask about and to maybe understand a little bit further is how is reading different across different age groups? So like preschool, and adolescents, and then as you grow older, how is reading different?
Yeah, I mean, that's something I get asked quite often. So what you'll find is that actually when children are young, like when you give birth to a young child and you have preschool children, really they're at the stage where they are learning to read. And when it comes to learning to read, they are listening, they're also looking at words, they're listening to sounds, and they're picking up language. And that is the important element for preschool children. But as they get older, there is this, I don't know, I call it the golden age, like, between 7 to 9, a bit younger for some children, maybe a little bit for older children, where they have enough vocabulary, they have enough of the words, they've been exposed to sufficient language that they can begin to read fluently and read quickly. And you'll see that for kids at this age, if they have enough access to books, they will read very quickly and they want to read more books to pick up their knowledge. That is not to say that once they are done with that stage, they no longer need to learn to read, because as adults, we too need to learn to read. So you already know how to read. You know your ABCs, you can read things. I can do that as well. When you came to NIE and you had to do your master's, your PhD, you had to read research articles. So that was a new kind of reading that you had to do. So you had to adjust, you had to adapt to get used to it. And for many adults, as they get older, they might be reading different kinds of texts. If you go into a different work environment, you might have to learn to read something else as well. So in a sense, reading proficiency is something we pick up when we are young, but it is something that we are constantly developing, we are growing, and we need practice to get better at it.
Yeah, so I did recall some of the moments where I found reading some of the journal articles when I was studying a little challenging because I needed a different set of strategies, different from what I have learned when I was in primary school or secondary school. So I really agree with what you just mentioned. I am a little bit more familiar with reading in in younger children, especially those who struggle with learning, struggle with reading, right? So I understand that reading with younger children, some of them do not have the ability to access some of the words. So in younger children, some of them use pictures to tell the story. So the pictures in the books will actually help them understand the story a little bit better. So that's one. Another example is how when younger readers who have challenges with reading have their parents or their teachers reading to them. So actually, I have a personal example here. So in my household, I have a lot of children at home, and some of them do not really enjoy reading. So they were reading this book, and it was a little bit boring, right? So this book was about rhinoceros in an open field. So what I've done is that I threw the mattress on the floor. I got all of them to jump on the mattress together with myself, and we were imitating the people observing the rhinos, right, from afar. So we were looking at my wife in the kitchen and pretending she's a rhino. And then the kid got really interested. And it's not just about the story, it is also how now the children are very engrossed in, they are now part of the story. And that really brings in that reading enjoyment.
Yeah, I love this example because, as you were sharing this example, I was thinking, wow, parents have to work so hard to get their kids into reading, because you don't just have to read, but you actually also have to dramatize. And I think that is something that is definitely important for getting the kids in. Going back to what you were talking earlier, I think there is a misconception sometimes with adults that reading is about reading text on a page. That means you are reading words. But actually, when it comes to learning to read, it actually involves a lot more than just learning to read the words on the page. Because before you can learn to read the words on the page, you learn that there's a book. You learn that there's a story, you turn the pages, and that's part of you. You listen to language, you learn that there's sound, there are narrative structures. So actually, before a child can even learn to read the words on the page, there are all these other things that the child needs to know how it operates, how reading operates. So the example that you brought out is a really good example of how we engage children in reading through their whole body experience and participation in the story.
Yes, and in fact, when I was doing that, I did enjoy myself too, compared to rereading the same book over and over again. So it's really enjoyable for the parent as well sometimes, and some form of bonding between parent and child. I'm just wondering if you have any other strategies that you feel that you might suggest in helping a child pick up reading?
Yeah, I think maybe I'll just suggest 3 strategies: reading aloud, reading together, and reading interest. So reading aloud first, just now what you did was an example of reading aloud. But reading aloud is really so important because a child gets to listen to a story. And sometimes we think that reading aloud is something you can only do at bedtime and something that you only do with very young children. But actually, reading aloud is something you can do any time of the day, and reading aloud is something you can do with any age. I remember one of my master's students, she told me that after our class, she decided that she would read to her primary 6 children. So in Singapore, in primary 6, they are taking the PSLE exam. So it's very stressful. The kids are preparing for the exam all the time. But at the end of every class, she would take 5 minutes and she would read a chapter or 2 from this book called A Monster Calls. It's a really beautiful book. It's about death and it's about grief. So you would think these are 12-year-olds, right? But she takes the end of every lesson and she spends time and she reads aloud to the children, and the children really loved it. So reading aloud was a way for them to listen to the story. It was for enjoyment and it was a form of well-being. They were studying for exams, but hey, surely you can read and listen and enjoy yourself during your PSLE year as well. So that's reading aloud. The second thing is reading together. Again, there is this misconception that when we think about reading, you're sitting by yourself and you're reading a book and it's quiet and you're alone. Certainly, there are times for that, and that is a very important experience of reading. But for children who are learning to read or who have a little bit of difficulty, sometimes it helps to be reading together. So reading together could involve you with the child and you're reading aloud to the child. And sometimes it's a very interesting book. There are stories there. There's a rhyme the child knows and the child will read along with you. Sometimes what can also happen is you read one page the child reads the other page. And it becomes a form of scaffolding because the child will feel like, oh, it's not so stressful. I'll just read this sentence and then somebody else is reading it. So it's a little bit more enjoyable. So that's the idea of reading together, not separately. And the last idea is the idea of reading interest. And for me, reading interest is about matching the child to the right book. I think the same will go for you. Sometimes you pick up a book, it's not particularly interesting, so you don't really feel like reading it. So for the child, we have to help the child to find a book that is at the child's level. So this is, I'm thinking about reading level, but also reading interest. And maybe I'll just share a little story. So I remember when my son was 8 years old. So that's really young. And I brought him on a conference with me. And we actually visited a place, a historical site. And there was a little small bookstore. And he actually looked at the books and he picked up one book there that's like a history of Europe or something. And he said he wanted to buy it. And I looked at it and then my teacher had one and he was 8. And I said, you can't read it. I mean, as in, comprehension and language, you don't know many of the words. And I said, why don't you read this book instead? This other book was The Boy on the Wooden Box. It's an autobiography. And he said, okay, he'll take it. And then he took it home and he enjoyed the book in the end. And that's about matching him to the right book. But I did have second thoughts after that because I was like, actually, he was interested in the first book. So maybe if I had gotten it, he wouldn't have been able to read it at that time. But should I have let him get that book because he was interested? So I think here you see me as a parent working with the interplay of looking at his reading level as well as his reading interest. And I think for many educators, that's what they are often working with. They are thinking about level and they are thinking about interest. But sometimes we forget and we focus only on one. So if the child has a book that's interesting, but the child can't read, the child will give up. But if the child has a book that is of the child's reading level, but the story is not interesting, the child will find it boring. So how do we find the right match? I think that's an important element of helping a child learn to enjoy reading.
Yeah, the strategies that you have shared are really insightful, and I really enjoyed what you have shared, the experiences, and I mean, paired reading, shared reading, as well as reading aloud. This is something that I practice at home as well and in my classroom, and I do feel that it's useful. I would like to talk a little bit more about reading interest though, because reading interest might not come naturally to everyone, right? So you've shared your example of your son picking out the book in the library. But in the case of readers who are struggling, sometimes it takes a lot before they can find a book that interests them. So perhaps I would like if you can share with us a little bit more about what are the factors that can help a learner in terms of gaining that reading interest.
Yeah, so maybe just to caveat to say that in my research, I've looked at typically performing readers. I mean, I've looked at a broad range, and this example I draw from looking at teenagers who tell me about their reading. So we look at teenagers who enjoy reading, and we ask them, what are the factors that got you into reading, right? And what we've found for these teenagers, at least when they told us about it, and I've seen it across different age groups, is that often they come from a home environment where there's this intensive immersion in reading. And with this intensive immersion, what we find is they have access to books both inside and outside of the home. So what do I mean by access to books? Basically, they have a lot of books, their parents buy them books, or their parents bring them to the library to borrow books. So with this, what it means is that whenever they want to read a book, there's an interesting book that they have access to. What was particularly interesting was we did a study during the COVID-19 pandemic, and there was a study in the UK as well. So we found that for children who had books at home, they enjoyed reading more during the pandemic, because during the pandemic, they didn't have to go to school. But when you have books at home, then you naturally gravitate towards this interesting material that you can read. Whereas children who don't have a lot of books at home, they actually enjoyed reading less after the pandemic because they couldn't go out of the house and there was not a lot of books. So access to books inside and outside the home is very important. The second important thing is reading role models, whether it could be parents, it could be grandparents, it could be siblings. But we find that with parents, for example, reading, it need not just be reading for pleasure. Very often you'll see them telling us that, oh, they see their parents reading, but their parents also read the news. Their parents may read for work. Their parents may read magazines. They may read fiction. They may read non-fiction. But the idea is parents themselves see reading as something that is meaningful. So they provide a role model for these young people who then look at their parents and say, oh, okay, reading is something that we do on an everyday basis, that we do to get more knowledge, that we do just for fun. The last thing I think that is really important is the idea of time, giving time for reading. And we found quite interestingly with some of these children and young adults telling us that their parents would control their time, not in a sinister sort of way, but the idea that the parents might manage their screen time and say like, oh, okay, you have only so much screen time, or this is the reading time, let's spend some time reading. So parents build routines into the everyday so that their kids could read. I suppose one last point that I didn't mention just now is the idea of teaching reading. So in these homes, the kids were often exposed to teaching reading. By teaching reading, it could be like me teaching the ABCs, teaching a child to read the words on a book. But I think to broaden it out a little bit, the idea of teaching includes things like teaching them how to find books. So bring your child to the library and telling them where it's kept, showing them the different genres, helping them to pick books. You're actually teaching them about how to find information, how to find books. So this is a form of teaching that is not real teaching in the way we think about school, but actually families where actually do that unknowingly.
Yeah, so like teaching them how to access books, teaching them how to learn how to pick up the books that might interest them.
Yes, that's right.
So I find a lot of your points that you have mentioned really interesting. I just wanted to bring the conversation to the perspective of struggling readers again. So I think you have mentioned access. So access to books, going to the libraries or having a household with books in every room. These are physical access to books, right? So I just thought in the context of learners who have difficulty in reading, perhaps access to books can also be in the form of access to the comprehension of text. So for example, if a child with a lot of books at home, but the child is not able to open the book and understand what the story is trying to tell, then this child will not have access to that story. So I think as practitioners, what we can do is really to give this child that access. So you have mentioned teaching reading earlier as well. So I think this is how we can create access to a particular group of children. But at the same time, our group of learners who are struggling to read, sometimes it takes a lot of structural support to overcome a lot of these reading barriers and challenges that they have. They are challenges, but some of these breakthroughs are really possible. And I think with my own observation, what I've realized is that social influence, support, and resilience actually really helps a struggling reader to really eventually find a book that they really enjoy.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree with you. And I know just now I mentioned in terms of levels, the reading level of the book as well as the interest of the book and having a wide range of books. But I think as teachers, right, we need to have the knowledge of what kind of books to use as well. So sometimes even readers, for example, series books, these are great books because they are repeated patterns. So I do have friends who come and ask me, I remember there was a particular time, they'll say, my kid is reading Geronimo Stilton all the time. Can I get my child to read something else? I'll say, yes, you can. Here are some other books you can recommend. But I also point out that books like Geronimo Stilton, there are certain strategies inside. There are, words that are bigger, they call out. So it's like a visualization for the reader. There's always a repeated pattern in series books. In Geronimo Stilton, it starts with, oh, hi, I'm a mouse and this is what it is. And actually, series books are very helpful because once they can get the pattern of a book, it frees them up to enjoy the story because the story is always the same. Now, this is not to say that you shouldn't read literature, but there is a time for a different kind of books. And we need to understand as educators how these different books are helping the student to learn to read differently. And in this case, with the series books, it's about extensive reading. That you can read a lot because it's easy for you to read. And that easy reading actually gives you practice. So having a classroom with some of these kinds of books, like the picture books that you mentioned earlier, series books, a range of different reading levels, that would be super helpful. Of course, the idea of having that social influence, right? The teacher who can encourage, the teacher who can sit with the person, the parent, the peer would be an important thing as well. But I know you were asking me about struggling readers, but that's really your area of research, and you spoke about the idea of resilience. So I thought maybe do you want to elaborate a little bit more on that, because that really I think came out strongly in your PhD study.
Yeah, so resilience is one of the most important points for struggling learners to learn in all aspects of their life. So academically, resilience is something that is very important. This is because in learning, they find it challenging to learn, and therefore they need the additional resilience. Right? So the same goes for reading. Because they have challenges in reading, often they come across failure a lot more often. So that resilience is very important. And how a lot of the learners that I've experienced with, working with, as well as the learners that I've interviewed in my PhD study, the resilience actually came a lot from their social support. So the people around them. So the parents that support them, the school teachers, and really all it takes is a teacher to give a very encouraging word for that child to build up on his self-esteem, and that goes a long way in terms of resilience, and that really goes a long way in building up a child's ability to then move on to reading on his own.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you bring up is very important in terms of the teacher. It's quite important not to have a deficit mindset, meaning that we think the child can't read. I mean, yes, certainly at that point, the child is unable to address certain things. But I think we are educators, we are always hopeful, right? And to have that hope and that the student can read. And when you have that strategy, it can also help you with understanding how to encourage the child to read. So certainly, I think people are very important.
Yes. So we are speaking about people in terms of educators, teachers of students, as well as parents. But I think another important group of individuals would be the peers, right? So I think there are peers in the classroom who are better at reading. For example, my enthusiastic reader at home. So I think in my household, I did have my enthusiastic child encourage the reluctant reader to read. Right. So I just thought if you have any thoughts on how do you think typical readers and struggling readers can support each other?
I think firstly, reading has to be cool. I mean, if somebody is reading a book that is really interesting and you know your friend is reading the book and you're interested in it, then you will want to pick it up. I remember my daughter coming back from school and saying, oh, my friend loves Agatha Christie and she's reading all these mysteries. So she wanted to read it too. So having that sort of recommendation comes from a friend. I'm so sorry to say, but friends are more fashionable than parents or teachers. So if your friends are reading a book, it suddenly becomes something that is quite exciting. So I think recommendations are quite important. And actually, as in the classroom, we can set up spaces for these to happen, for there to be book talk time, for there to be time for individuals to share about the interesting stories they've read, for people to show the books that they're reading. So it can be built in for peer recommendation. I think the other one for struggling readers might also be the idea of book buddies, having a better, older, or more proficient reader to read along with the child who is struggling. But I think in that case, the match is quite important as well, because the reading buddy would have to be patient. And I think it's important to help them to understand that, hey, they're actually helping each other to read better. It's not a one-way affair. It's a two-way affair where we're reading together, we're reading buddies, and we're helping each other.
What you shared about the reading buddies as well as the influence between peers actually reminded me of something that actually happened. In fact, this is one of the first stories that kind of inspired me to venture into reading and doing this research with my PhD with you. So this was back when I was teaching, and what happened was I encountered this student who really enjoys reading. She always brings a book into the classroom, and in the classroom, when I ask her about the book, she gets really excited. So initially, this conversation was only between myself and this particular student. But because she got so excited, then she started getting the conversation going with the other students in the class. So after a while, all four of them started talking about the book. Right? But then eventually, I realized that not all four of them were interested in that topic. This is a teenage girl, so she was reading some vampire stories. So there were boys in the class, and they were not very interested. So eventually, this led to me bringing them to the library, which was just next door, and then I started picking out books to them. So I felt that in this story, this girl was that social influence because she kind of spread her love for reading across everybody in the classroom.
Well, that's a lovely example as well, because what was happening was you were also teaching reading, but not in the way you would normally do it as a teacher. Because normally as a teacher, you'll be in the classroom, you'll be going through the exercises with them and helping them to improve their comprehension. But you're activating another part of reading because you brought them to the library. So you're teaching them how to find books. So I'm really glad you managed to bring that into your classroom.
Yes, and then eventually in the subsequent weeks, all of them came into the class with books. So I was so excited when I started seeing that.
That's great.
Yeah, so perhaps we can move on to the next topic, how social influence plays a significant role in shaping and reading habits. So perhaps you can share a little bit more on your perspectives on how parents, teachers, and peers can contribute to a strong reading culture.
I think the important thing, as I've shared earlier, is the idea of access and modeling, making sure that they have books and, modeling that reading behavior to them. But maybe one way when we think about the idea of reading culture that we can start with is how do we create a learning environment to have these habits, to set these routines. So for example, in the home, using my home as an example, I would, I set up a reading corner, I had bookshelves that were at the right height and I got books that my kids would read and I would borrow books from the library and they would always be there. And every night before bed, I would spend time reading with the kids. So that is a form of routine that I'm setting. And in the classroom, the teachers can do that as well because what they can do is they can have a reading corner, they can set up a space, they can set up a library, and they can then have these maybe circle time or reading time that they can read to the children. I think one of the things to know is that children love to read and they love being read to. And actually, after you read a book to them, and if the story is really exciting, they get really excited about the book. So I remember I used to do volunteer reading at my children's preschool. And what I would do is I would ask the teachers, I said, is it all right if I leave my books here for a few weeks after I'm done because I'm happy to leave them there. But what always struck me was when I finished reading the story, then I put the books on the table, the kids would go to the book. They were not interested in me. They would go to the book that I had read, and some of them would be flipping the pages and reading it aloud by themselves or just looking at the pictures. So in my imagination, like a good combination would be you would pick a book that would be really interesting, and then you would have a few other books that might be around the same topic. And that one book that you're reading, maybe you might have 2 or 3 copies. You would read the book to the child over the week, and you might read the other books. But all throughout the week, you would let the children explore those same books around those topics, and you can see where the enjoyment of reading actually comes in together with, say, vocabulary learning, as well as kind of them learning about the world. If you just thought about the kind of books you're going to bring in for, say, the next 2 weeks and rotate around those books. So these little tweaks, right, can actually help to, I like to use, the word in my head is optimize, but I feel like that's not a very good word. But it's like about optimizing the reading experience and the learning and making it enjoyable all at the same time. Yeah,
so a lot of effort put into creating the environment that is suitable for the children, picking out the right books and the processes. So this is something that's really interesting. I might try that at home.
I think sometimes we don't recognize that teachers need the time to do that planning, that selection, so that their lesson goes well. So I do think that teachers need to have that little bit of time, or a lot of time to think about all these things as well.
So these are really useful strategies, a combination of what you can do at home as well as what you can do in the school setting. I was just wondering if you have any of your research where you have investigated on school-based reading initiatives, and any of some of these research that you have done made a difference.
I'm not sure about making a difference, but maybe I'll tell you the story about how I got started doing research on school libraries. So this was in 2000 and maybe 13 or 2014, and I was doing reading research in the school. And what happened was I was sitting in the school library. The teachers had put a lot of effort into the school library in terms of the school collection. But one of the questions that they were asking was, why are the students not coming into the library? And later when I spoke to the students, I realized that, the school library didn't look interesting to them. Sometimes the lights were turned off. They didn't know it was open and it was used for detention. So they were like, oh no, we don't want to go to the school library, because sometimes the detention kids get sent there. But that was a really sort of transformative experience for me, because it made me think, why do we always ask, why don't the students go into the library? The question should be, what is interesting in the library? Why should they want to go to the library? And that really has fundamentally changed the way I've looked at things and started me looking at school libraries. And what I realized is the public library, I love our public libraries. They're full of resources and that. But the public library itself is very big. It's very intimidating for children who may not have grown up in literacy-rich homes and their parents as well. So the school library is smaller, but if it is well set up, it has the right books, interesting books, it actually has that potential to make a difference because it is less intimidating. In fact, the fact that it has fewer books, but at your level, means that you can go in, there's a high chance you will find a book that you like. And especially in libraries school libraries where they have teacher librarians or librarians, you'll find that they can actually help the kids to match the kids to the right book. So what I would say is that I have found in my research is that in school libraries can make a difference as part of that changing culture. I think a second thing is that I love teachers. I mean, I teach at NIE, so I love teachers. But, I love teachers because I've seen the difference that teachers can make just by encouraging students to read, bringing in books to read. I've seen one of my students actually had a little experiment where she actually for 9 weeks got the students to log into the NLB app. These are secondary school students, to try and read ebooks. And before that, they were not familiar with ebooks. But after that, they were like, okay, I don't mind reading. And I didn't realize that there were so many ebooks to read. So I think the idea with these two examples of school libraries and teachers, sort of building the routines, is that in order to enjoy reading, we need to have the time to read and to set these routines and to have the resources for reading. So that's why I think a lot of my emphasis in my work has been on how do we create an environment to help the child or young adult want to read.
I really enjoyed what you have shared so far, because it really speaks about the involvement of so many different parties. So there are parents from the home, and then there are teachers, there's the school, there's the school's librarian. And I think more importantly, there's also the involvement of peers sometimes in supporting reading. Right? I think this is really important, and I just wanted to share a little bit of what I found in my study. So in my study, what I found was that the reality of the situation is that not all children might have opportunities with parents or teachers who might support them with reading. But what is interesting is that although maybe some children might not have parents that read with them, but their teachers can kind of fill in the gap in terms of finding that right book for them to enjoy reading. And for those where teachers were not able to be there, there were others who come to fill in the gap. So you can see that, of course, the more social support or social influence one has, the better. But at the same time, it is very encouraging to see that there are actually a lot of people around that could support a reader. Right? So that is one of my thoughts after hearing all of the points that you've shared. Have anything else to add for this?
I don't know. This thing just came to my head. Don't give up. I know nowadays we kind of think like, there's social media. There are so many things that are competing. And sometimes as an educator or as a parent or somebody who works with reading, you might just feel like giving up, because you'll be like, why would a child want to read when they can watch K-drama? We have that conversation at home as well. I was just talking to my son and he said, I've got these few books, but I've got not enough time because now I'm in upper secondary. I'm studying for my major exams, and sometimes I do want to relax. Reading is relaxing, but there isn't enough time in the day. I think sometimes we think with the onslaught of technology that it's a losing battle, but I don't think it's a losing battle. if you think about it, we've got the radio, and then people say, oh, nobody's going to read anymore. And then we had TV, and then people said, nobody's going to read anymore. And we're still reading, and I think people are still reading. But I think it's important for us as educators to understand that reading is foundational for understanding a lot of the world, and that it is important for us not to give up and to build a habit in the kids, cultivate that reading habit, especially when they're young. And then as they get older, to create the opportunity, to give them the time and to give them the space and to match them with the right book so that they can have that opportunity to read more, and that in the hope, and all that is in the hope of developing that independent reader who can come back to reading anytime he or she wants to.
So actually the phrase that you've mentioned, don't give up, is something that I would like to close this podcast with. So this is something that I really believe in, and in fact I have examples and stories on how not giving up is actually the key to overcoming some of the reading challenges in some of the learners that I've experienced. So the first example is again one of the participants of my study. So this participant was a secondary school student who was sharing with me that she had been having a lot of challenges reading since she was in preschool. But it was because of a single sentence that the preschool teacher said that encouraged her to read, and that got her reading up to this day. So it's over the entire primary school and secondary school years. So this is one example of how a very simple word of encouragement by a preschool teacher can support the reading motivation of a particular child. So that don't give up motto is there. The other example is actually my own example. I've shared earlier that I'm a foster parent, and I kind of went through the phase of giving up because when I first took some of them on, several of them were struggling readers, and I kind of found it a little bit challenging because I have been educating struggling learners for a very long time. But when some of these children come to live in my household, I found it challenging to teach them how to read. So I think I benchmark my expectations for them as if I would benchmark my biological daughter, which was not appropriate at that point in time. So why I mentioned don't give up is because it needed time. So it took me about 6 months before I realized that, hey, I could teach them how to read as well. So it ended with all of my children reading, and again, bringing back the topic of influence between peers. So my daughter was the one that influenced them because there was once I saw all of them reading together in the room because the foster siblings wanted to play, but my daughter didn't want to. She just wanted to read the book, and they had no choice. So they started reaching out to the books in the class in the room, and then they started reading as well. And my daughter, she will go out, and every time we go out together, she will bring a book. And then her younger foster siblings will be like, oh, Cheche is carrying a book out. I want to bring a book too. And then that is that initiation of that reading. So initially he wasn't really reading, but because he had a book in his hand and he sees his sister reading on the MRT, then he opens the book and starts looking at the picture. So that is the first step. So I really liked what you have mentioned, which is not giving up, because I've seen these happening.
Yeah, so maybe a strategy could be bring a book and leave your phone at home.
Yes.
The leave the phone at home would be the real challenge.
Yes. Yeah, so don't give up would be my basically my concluding and closing point that I would like to bring across. I was just wondering if you have any closing remarks that you would like to share with the audience.
No, I guess it's just, to all the parents and teachers out there, thank you so much. And thank you so much, Edmund, for having me here. It's such a pleasure to be here.
I hope that you really enjoyed this session and this provided you insights to the world of reading, whether you're a parent, whether you're an educator, or whether you're a peer. Thank you for joining us at DAS's Same But Different podcast. Please like and share and subscribe. Share this with all of your friends. Thank you.